In a classroom where silence usually speaks the loudest, one quiet student is about to show that being overlooked doesn't mean being ordinary. Ms. Clark was the kind of teacher who demanded respect and hard work. She was strict and had high expectations for her students. Known for her sharp words and no-nonsense attitude, she ran the classroom like a drill sergeant. She wasn't the type to tolerate laziness, and she expected all her students to give their best effort. Today's math lesson was no different. The classroom was filled with students slumping in their seats, bored by the usual lesson. The topic was basic algebra, something they had covered for weeks. Many of the students barely paid attention, lost in their own thoughts or doodling in their notebooks. But there was one student who was different, Jaden. He sat quietly in the back of the class, his eyes focused on his notebook. While other students were zoning out, Jaden was deeply engaged, quietly working on advanced math problems that went beyond what he was being taught. His pencil moved quickly across the pages, solving problems that no one else could understand. He wasn't trying to show off or draw attention to himself, he just loved math and was completely absorbed in it. Little did anyone know, Jaden was about to surprise everyone in the room. Ms. Clark stood at the front of the class, holding up a worksheet with a frustrated expression. She looked around at the students, many of them staring blankly at their desks. "This is basic algebra," she said, raising her voice. "We've been going over this for weeks, and yet, half of you can't even get it right. Why is that?" The students shifted in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others trying to hide behind their notebooks. It was clear that Ms. Clark was fed up. She paced back and forth, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. "If you don't get this now, you'll be setting yourself up for failure later on," she continued, her voice cutting through the silence. She stopped suddenly and scanned the room, her gaze landing on Jaden in the back. He had been quiet all class, working diligently in his notebook, as usual. "Jaden," Ms. Clark said sharply, her tone piercing the stillness. "You've been so quiet back there. Let's see if you can solve this problem." The class turned to look at Jaden. Some students exchanged glances, wondering what he would do. A few of them felt sorry for him, knowing he wasn't the type to speak up, while others didn't think much of it. Jaden's stomach tightened. The spotlight was on him now. He didn't like being the center of attention, and all eyes on him made him feel uncomfortable. He could feel his face heat up, but he didn't panic. He had done problems like this before. Jaden took a deep breath and stood up, trying to stay calm. He knew he could do this. Ms. Clark turned to the board and wrote a long, complicated algebraic equation. It stretched across the board, filled with letters, numbers, and exponents that looked more like a puzzle than a math problem. The class stared at it, unsure of how to approach it. It was far beyond the level of math they had been learning, and many of them thought there was no way anyone could solve it. She turned to Jaden, who was still standing at the front. "Let's see what you've got, Jaden," she said with a raised eyebrow. "Solve it for us." A few students in the back whispered to each other, doubting Jaden's ability to solve the problem. "No way he can do this," one whispered. "That's way too hard." Another student quietly laughed. Ms. Clark, sensing their doubt, added with a hint of sarcasm, "Do you need a calculator, Jaden? Or can you do it without one?" The class snickered, but Jaden didn't react. He wasn't distracted by their doubts or the sarcasm. His focus was on the equation in front of him. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the chalk, his hands steady despite the eyes on him. He stepped up to the board and began writing. His movements were slow at first, but his mind worked quickly, breaking down the equation piece by piece. He solved the first part, then the next, all with careful, steady strokes of the chalk. The room fell silent, as everyone realized Jaden wasn't struggling, he was solving it. As Jaden continued solving the equation, the class watched in complete silence. His chalk moved across the board with ease, breaking down each part of the complicated equation. One by one, the numbers and symbols seemed to fall into place. It wasn't rushed, but each move was precise, as if he had solved similar problems 1,000 times before. When he finished, Jaden stepped back from the board and looked at the class. The room was still silent. No one had expected him to do it, let alone finish it so effortlessly. Ms. Clark stood frozen, her eyes locked on the equation. She quickly checked his work, her fingers tracing each step. The problem had been solved perfectly. There were no mistakes. At that moment, Ms. Clark realized she had misjudged Jaden. She had always thought of him as quiet and average, just another student in the back of the class. But now, as she stood there, she saw something entirely different, a student with a natural gift for math that she had completely overlooked. The class was still in shock. They had never seen Jaden show this kind of brilliance before. His quiet nature had hidden his talent, and now, they were all beginning to see him in a new light. Ms. Clark stood in front of the class, her usual confident posture replaced with a look of surprise. She had always thought of Jaden as just another quiet student who didn't stand out. But now, seeing his impressive math skills, she felt humbled. I misjudged you, Jaden, she said softly. You've done something remarkable today. Your understanding of this material is beyond what I expected. The class was still silent, watching the exchange. Ms. Clark took a deep breath and continued, You've shown a level of intelligence that's not just impressive, it's extraordinary. Jaden, still uncomfortable with the attention, nodded quietly. He wasn't used to being praised like this. He shifted slightly and explained in a soft voice, I've been studying on my own, doing extra work, reading ahead in math books. He didn't want to explain too much, but he wanted Ms. Clark to know that this wasn't a fluke. The atmosphere in the classroom had changed. The students who had once dismissed Jaden as quiet and ordinary now looked at him with new respect. Whispers of admiration filled the room. Jaden had shown that he wasn't just another student blending into the background. He was someone to be noticed. After class ended, Ms. Clark called Jaden to stay for a moment. She looked at him with a mix of respect and sincerity. Jaden, she began, I owe you an apology. I underestimated you, and I was wrong. You have a real gift. I want to help you reach your full potential. She paused, then added, there are math competitions and advanced programs that could really challenge you. I think you could do great things if you're willing to try. Jaden felt a mix of emotions. He had never been offered anything like this before. He had always kept his abilities hidden, unsure if others would accept or care. But now, for the first time, someone believed in him. He was intrigued by the idea of pushing himself further, but the thought of stepping out of his comfort zone was still intimidating. As the bell rang and the rest of the class filed out, Jaden sat quietly at his desk. His classmates, once indifferent to him, were now looking at him differently. They were curious, whispering among themselves. No longer was he just the quiet boy in the back of the room. He had shown them something extraordinary. For the first time, Jaden wondered if maybe it was time to embrace who he really was. As Jaden sat in his room that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened that day. For the first time, he realized that being underestimated by others didn't define who he was or what he could do. He had spent so long hiding in the background, believing that no one would notice his talents. But today, he had proven to himself and to others that he was capable of so much more. The moment wasn't just about solving a difficult equation. It was about stepping out of the shadows and showing the world what he was truly capable of. Even though it felt scary, Jaden knew that embracing his abilities was the only way to grow. He no longer wanted to hide. This experience had shown him that he was worthy of success and recognition, and that he shouldn't be afraid to stand out. Don't hide your talents or let others decide what you're capable of. You have unique abilities that the world needs to see. Step out of the shadows, embrace your strengths, and show everyone what you can do. Believe in yourself, because your potential is limitless.